I'll never forget the moment my mother slid that contract across our kitchen table. The cold granite surface reflecting the overhead lights as starkly as her expression. The leather binder looked expensive, official, intimidating. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Just like the family lawyer who stood behind her, arms crossed, watching. Me with that practiced neutral expression that cost my parents $400 an hour. "It's just a formality, Emma," my mother said, her voice carrying that familiar dismissive tone she reserved for conversations she considered beneath her. "Your sister needs this loan for her business venture, and the bank requires a co-signer with better credit. You know how important this is to Jessica." I stared at the thick stack of papers, my fingers hovering over the edges. $300,000. My name, my responsibility, my future potentially ruined. All for my sister's third, guaranteed successful business idea in 5 years. "Can I at least read through it first?" I asked, reaching for the first page. My father checked his Rolex and sighed dramatically. "We don't have time for that, Emma. We're meeting the loan officer in an hour. Jessica's investor is waiting, and this opportunity won't last forever. You know how these things work." No, actually, I didn't know how these things worked. Because unlike my sister, I wasn't handed business connections and startup capital on a silver platter. I worked night shifts to put myself through accounting school, while Jessica flitted between expensive degrees she never finished and entrepreneurial inspirations that mysteriously always required family funding. I looked from my mother's impatient face to my father's distracted one. They weren't even really seeing me, just an obstacle to be navigated on the way to giving Jessica what she wanted. Again. "Fine," I said quietly, accepting the expensive pen my mother handed me. "But I need to use the bathroom first. Give me 5 minutes." As I stood up, our family lawyer, Mr. Bennett, cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should review the key points with Emma before—" "That won't be necessary," my mother interrupted. "Emma understands her responsibility to this family, don't you, dear?" I nodded, the perfect, dutiful daughter. "Of course, just 5 minutes." What my parents didn't know as I walked away with that leather binder tucked under my arm was that I wasn't the same doormat they'd raised me to be. Not anymore. The quiet, compliant Emma who always stepped aside for her sister, who swallowed her dreams to make room for Jessica's ambitions. That Emma died 6 months ago when I discovered what my loving family really thought of me. And as I closed the bathroom door behind me and pulled out my own pen, I smiled for the first time that day, because while they thought they were forcing me into another sacrifice, they had actually given me the perfect opportunity. They were so sure I would just sign without reading that they'd handed me the power to change everything. 5 minutes. That's all I needed to modify 3 key clauses they would never bother to verify. 5 minutes to ensure that this time, blind devotion to my sister would come with conditions they never saw coming. I uncapped my pen, eyes scanning for the sections I had already anticipated and researched. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. For once in my life, I felt completely calm as I carefully altered the terms that would finally set me free. Growing up as Jessica's sister meant living in a perpetual shadow. Our 3-bedroom colonial house in Westbrook had always felt spacious until Jessica needed the guest room for her creative studio. Our parents' attention had seemed abundant until Jessica's dance recitals and science fairs began consuming our family calendar. The pattern was set early. Jessica shines, Emma supports. At family gatherings in our backyard, relatives would fawn over Jessica's latest accomplishment while I served drinks and smiled politely. "Your sister is going places," they'd tell me, as if my own academic achievements and quiet reliability were invisible. "It's wonderful how supportive you are." Translation? Stay in your lane, keep making Jessica look good. I learned to make myself smaller, quieter, more efficient. By 16, I could anticipate Jessica's needs before she voiced them. By 18, I had mastered the art of downplaying my own successes to avoid overshadowing her. When I got accepted to the State University's honors program with a partial scholarship, my parents barely acknowledged it because Jessica was going through a breakup that same week. "Not now, Emma," my mother had said, barely glancing at my acceptance letter. "Your sister is devastated. Tyler was supposed to take her to the lake house this summer." I remember standing in our kitchen, letter in hand, wondering if there would ever be a right time for my achievements to matter. That night, I made a decision that would shape the next 7 years of my life. I would build my independence silently, saving every dollar, excelling academically without seeking praise, and preparing for the day I could walk away from the relentless imbalance of our family dynamic. College offered a brief respite. Living in a dorm 2 hours from home, I discovered who Emma could be when she wasn't defined as Jessica's sister. I double-majored in accounting and business law, working evening shifts at the campus financial aid office where I learned the intricate language of contracts, loans, and financial obligations. Knowledge that would one day become my armor. But home always pulled me back. Summer breaks, holidays, family emergencies, which typically meant Jessica's emergencies. When she totaled her car junior year, I gave her my savings intended for a study abroad program. When she dropped out of her master's program to pursue interior design, I moved back home temporarily to help stabilize the family finances, delaying my own career advancement. The true breaking point came 6 months ago. I had just received a promotion at the accounting firm where I'd worked since graduation. My boss had specifically mentioned my attention to detail with contracts and financial analysis. For once, I decided to celebrate my success by hosting a small dinner at my apartment, the first time I'd invited my family to my space instead of going to theirs. I prepared for days, cleaning my modest one-bedroom apartment, cooking my mother's favorite roast with rosemary potatoes, even buying the expensive wine my father preferred. I wanted them to see that despite always coming second, I had built something for myself, that I mattered. They never showed up. After waiting 2 hours, I called my mother only to hear laughter and clinking glasses in the background. "Oh, Emma," she exclaimed, sounding surprised. "Was that tonight? I'm so sorry." "Sweetheart, Jessica's investor meeting went brilliantly, and we're celebrating at Riverside Grill. You understand, right? This could finally be her big break." I stood in my kitchen surrounded by cooling food and carefully set places for 4 people who wouldn't come. Something inside me shifted that night. Not dramatically, not with tears or screams, but quietly and fundamentally, like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. The next day, I contacted an independent lawyer and began preparing. I researched family financial ties, studied contract law after work, and started documenting every time I had financially supported Jessica or my parents. Then I waited for the opportunity I knew would eventually come, Jessica's next brilliant idea that would require family money. When it arrived in the form of a luxury pet spa concept, I was ready. 3 weeks of Jessica's enthusiastic pitches to our parents, 2 family dinners where she presented elaborate vision boards, and finally, the inevitable conclusion. Jessica needed startup capital, but her credit score was too low for a business loan. That's when my parents turned to me, the reliable daughter with the perfect credit score and stable income, the invisible safety net they had come to take for granted. "It's what family does, Emma," my father had said when he first broached the subject, his tone suggesting that refusing wasn't an option. "We support each other's dreams." I nodded and asked thoughtful questions about the loan terms. I expressed appropriate concern about the responsibility. And then I agreed, with just enough reluctance to avoid suspicion, but enough compliance to maintain my role as the dependable daughter, which brought us to today. to the leather binder and the contract my parents expected me to sign blindly, to the bathroom where I now stood, making 3 careful modifications to the legal text. First, a clause specifying that if payments were missed for 3 consecutive months, ownership of any business assets would transfer proportionally to all co-signers, not just revert to the bank. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Second, a requirement that all business decisions would require written approval from all financially responsible parties. And third, the addition of a mutual release clause that would free me from any future financial obligations to family members, once this loan was satisfied, in any manner. My handwriting matched the formal text perfectly, a skill I'd practiced for weeks. The changes were subtle enough to go unnoticed by people who assumed I would never dare to advocate for myself, yet legally binding if ever scrutinized. I took a deep breath, tucked my pen away, and returned to the kitchen where my parents waited impatiently. Finally, my mother said, checking her watch, "Mr. Bennett needs to get to another appointment." I smiled apologetically and sat down, flipping to the signature page without hesitation. "You're doing the right thing, Emma," my father said, his hand briefly touching my shoulder, the closest thing to affection I'd received in months. As I signed my name with a flourish, I felt no guilt, no hesitation, only a quiet certainty that this was indeed the right thing, just not for the reasons they believed. Mr. Bennett notarized the document quickly, barely glancing at the pages as he processed them. My mother tucked the contract back into its leather binder, clearly relieved that I hadn't caused any problems. "Jessica will be so thrilled," she said, already reaching for her phone to deliver the good news. "This means everything to her." I nodded, gathering my purse and keys. "I know exactly what this means," I said truthfully. "I'm glad I could help." As I walked to my car under the bright spring sunshine of suburban Connecticut, I felt lighter than I had in years. In their rush to please Jessica, my parents had handed me the key to my own liberation. They thought they knew me, predictable, reliable Emma who always put family first. But in 3 months' time, when Jessica inevitably mismanaged her finances as she had with every previous venture, they would discover just how little they understood about the daughter they had underestimated for the last time. The next 3 months unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. Jessica's posh palace pet spa launched with a lavish grand opening event that cost nearly $30,000, an expense not included in her original business plan that I'd overheard my parents discussing. I received an embossed invitation to the champagne reception featuring an organic canine treat bar and pet psychic readings. I attended, of course. Dutiful Emma wouldn't miss her sister's big moment. The converted Victorian house on Maple Street had been transformed with custom millwork, crystal chandeliers, and imported Italian tile, all chronicled in loving detail on Jessica's business Instagram account. Standing in the reception area amid local influencers and their bejeweled pets, I calculated the burn rate in my head. At this spending pace, the loan funds would be depleted within 5 months, not the 18 projected in the hastily assembled business plan my parents had shown me. "Isn't it fabulous?" Jessica gushed, appearing at my side in a designer pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her golden retriever Bentley wore a matching bow tie. "The premium package is already booked solid for 6 weeks." I smiled, raising my champagne flute. "It's certainly impressive. Have you finalized your staffing yet?" Jessica waved dismissively. "I'm interviewing next week. I want only the best groomers in the state, people who understand luxury service." Translation: she hadn't hired anyone yet but was already accepting bookings. "And your accounting system?" I asked casually. "I could help set that up for you." "Oh, don't worry about that boring stuff." She laughed, touching my arm briefly. "Dad's golf buddy recommended a software that does everything automatically. I just need to input the sales." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral while mentally noting another red flag. My sister had never balanced a checkbook in her life, yet she was now responsible for tracking expenses for a $300,000 business venture. The countdown had begun. My mother appeared, champagne in hand, beaming with pride. "Emma, doesn't your sister have an eye for design? She's already been approached about franchising opportunities." I raised my eyebrows. "Really? That's fast." "Well, not officially," Jessica amended quickly, "but several people have mentioned it could be a possibility down the line." My mother continued as if Jessica had signed a multi-million-dollar deal. "I always knew she had entrepreneurial talent. Some people just have that special something, don't they?" I smiled tightly. "Some people certainly do." That evening, as I drove home to my apartment, I didn't feel anger or resentment. Emotions I had long associated with family interactions. Instead, I felt an odd sense of calm certainty. Years of observing Jessica's patterns had taught me that her enthusiasm always outpaced her follow-through. Her vision exceeded her attention to detail. Her appetite for acclaim dwarfed her capacity for daily operational discipline. This wasn't speculation, it was mathematical probability. And I had finally learned to use it rather than fight against it. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet I'd created the day after signing the modified loan documents. In column A, I had listed every predictable failure point in Jessica's business model based on her previous ventures. Column B contained estimated timeframes for each breaking point. Column C held my prepared responses. First missed vendor payment? Week 11, according to my calculations. Staff retention issues? By week 8. Cash flow problems? Week 14. Frantic call from Jessica about loan payments? Week 12. I wasn't hoping for failure. I was simply preparing for the inevitable based on observable patterns. The difference was that this time, I had positioned myself to create leverage from the chaos rather than being dragged under by it. The first sign that my predictions were on track came 7 weeks after the opening. I was at work reviewing a client's tax position when my phone lit up with a text from Jessica. "SOS. Can you come by the spa after work? Staff emergency." I replied that I'd be there at 6, then returned to my spreadsheet. Right on schedule, 1 week earlier than my prediction, but well within the margin of error. When I arrived at Posh Palace that evening, I found Jessica pacing the reception area, her perfect blowout looking distinctly less perfect than usual. "Thank God you're here," she said, pulling me inside. "I'm completely blindsided. Maria and Trent both quit today, without notice. They were my best groomers, and I have the Westbrook Ladies Auxiliary bringing in their dogs tomorrow for a special event. I can't cancel. The president of the committee is an investor's wife." I set my purse down calmly. "That's unfortunate. Did they say why they're leaving?" Jessica flung her hands up dramatically. "Some nonsense about promised commissions and schedule changes, but that's not important right now. I need solutions. Mom suggested you might be able to help with the bookings tomorrow since you're so, organized." I maintained a neutral expression. "You want me to help groom dogs?" "God, no," Jessica laughed. "I want you to manage the front desk and scheduling while I handle the grooming. You just need to check people in, offer them champagne, and make sure the experience feels luxury." I tilted my head. "I have a job, Jessica. I can't just take a day off without notice." Her face fell into the familiar expression that had always worked on our parents, slightly trembling lower lip, wide eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Please, Emma. I'm drowning here. Mom and Dad are at the vineyard for their anniversary weekend. I have no one else to ask." In the past, this would be where I caved, where responsible Emma rearranged her life to accommodate Jessica's poor planning. But that pattern was precisely what I was breaking. "I understand you're in a difficult position," I said evenly. But I have client meetings tomorrow that I can't reschedule. Have you considered hiring temporary help through an agency? Jessica's expression shifted from pleading to incredulous. An agency? At this hour? And the rates they charge would completely wreck my budget this month. I picked up my purse again. I wish I could help, but I simply can't miss work tomorrow. Perhaps you could call some of your friends to volunteer, or reschedule the event? The conversation deteriorated quickly after that. Jessica cycled through her usual tactics: guilt, emotional manipulation, vague promises of future favors. When none worked, she resorted to anger. I can't believe my own sister won't help me during a crisis, she finally snapped. After everything our family has done for you. I paused at the door, genuinely curious. What exactly has our family done for me, Jessica? The question seemed to catch her off guard. What? We've always been there for you. We're family. Being family doesn't mean dropping everything whenever you face a consequence of your own actions, I said quietly. I hope you find a solution for tomorrow. As I walked to my car, I heard Jessica call after me. Mom and Dad will hear about this. I had no doubt they would, and for the first time, that prospect didn't fill me with dread. Sure enough, my mother called the next morning while I was preparing for my client meeting. Emma, I'm very disappointed, she began without preamble. Jessica told us what happened. She needed one day of your time to save an important business relationship. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Good morning to you too, Mom. How's the vineyard? Don't change the subject. Your sister is trying to build something important. As family, we need to support each other's dreams. The familiar refrain would normally have made me acquiesce immediately. But today, I found myself responding differently. I agree that families should support each other, I said, which is why I co-signed a $300,000 loan for Jessica's business. That was my contribution. My support does not extend to neglecting my own professional responsibilities whenever Jessica fails to plan properly. The silence on the other end was profound. In 27 years, I had never spoken to my mother this way. I don't appreciate your tone, she finally said, or what you're implying about your sister. I'm not implying anything, Mom. I'm stating facts. Jessica fired her office manager 3 weeks ago because she didn't like her energy, according to what she told me at Sunday dinner. She hasn't replaced her. She's been underpaying her staff compared to industry standards. Again, her own admission when she was bragging about her profit margins. These decisions have consequences. Those consequences are not emergencies for me to solve. Another long pause. When did you become so cold? My mother finally asked, her voice quieter. I'm not cold. I've simply recognized my own worth and started acting accordingly. I checked my watch. I need to go now. My client is expecting me. I hope you and Dad enjoy the rest of your weekend. I ended the call before she could respond. An unprecedented act in our family's power dynamic. As I gathered my files for the meeting, I felt a surge of something unfamiliar. Not the guilt I had expected, but something closer to pride. For the first time, I had stated my position clearly without apologizing for having boundaries. This small rebellion sent ripples through our family system. My father left a gruff voicemail about family loyalty that evening. Jessica texted a series of increasingly passive-aggressive messages until finally declaring she would find a way to manage without my help, as usual. My mother sent a formal-looking email detailing all the times the family had been there for me, a revisionist. History so creative it might have qualified as fiction. I responded to none of them. Instead, I focused on my work, exceeding my quarterly targets and receiving commendation from the partners at the firm. I attended a professional development conference I'd previously skipped to help Jessica move. Apartments. I joined a hiking group that met on Sundays, making me unavailable for the family dinners that had often devolved into Jessica-centric strategy sessions. 2 weeks after the grooming incident, the first significant crack appeared in Jessica's business facade. I was having dinner with a client when my phone buzzed with a notification. A payment for 7,843.26 had been declined from the business account linked to the loan. I excused myself from the table and stepped outside to check my banking app. As expected, the automatic withdrawal for one of Jessica's vendors had failed due to insufficient funds. The first domino had fallen. I returned to my dinner without making any calls. This wasn't an emergency for me to solve. This was simply the mathematical certainty I had been counting on. The next day, I received 3 voicemails from Jessica, each more frantic than the last. I listened to them all before calling her back during my lunch break. "Finally!" she answered immediately. "Did you see the notification? The payment to the supplier was declined. They're threatening to stop deliveries of the organic shampooing products, and I have the charity pet fashion show this weekend." "I saw," I replied calmly. "What's your plan?" "My plan? Emma, I need your help. Can you transfer some money to cover it until my next booking payments come through?" I took a bite of my salad. "That's not a plan, Jessica. That's asking someone else to solve your problem temporarily." "What is wrong with you lately?" Her voice rose with indignation. "Since when do you act like this?" "Since I realized that helping you avoid consequences doesn't actually help you," I said. "What's the current balance in your business account?" After some hesitation, she admitted, "About $2,000. "And the next client payments?" "They're not due until next week." A pause. "Maybe I could ask Mom and Dad." "They're co-signers on the loan, too," I reminded her. "This affects their credit as well. Before you approach them, you should have a complete picture of the financial situation to present solutions, not just problems." To my surprise, Jessica's tone changed. Would you look at the books for me? Just to help me figure out where things went wrong?" And there it was, the opening I had been waiting for. "I could," I said carefully, "but I'd need full access to all the financial records, vendor contracts, and operational documents. And we'd need to discuss some changes to how financial decisions are made going forward." The silence stretched between us. Jessica had never ceded control to anyone, especially not to me. But desperation has a way of reshaping priorities. "Fine," she finally said. "Come by the spa tonight after closing. I'll have everything ready." As I hung up, I opened my spreadsheet and updated column C. Step 1 of my response plan was now active, right on schedule. The balance of power had finally begun to shift, and Jessica didn't even realize she had just invited me to claim the leverage my contract modifications had created. For the first time in our relationship, I was no longer the safety net. I was the solution she couldn't afford to refuse. I arrived at Posh Palace precisely at 8:15 p.m., 15 minutes after closing. The evening light cast long shadows through the Victorian windows, and the closed sign hung crookedly on the front door. I could see Jessica moving around inside, her silhouette darting nervously between rooms. When I knocked, she practically jumped. Through the decorative glass, I watched her compose herself before opening the door with a forced smile. "Thanks for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. The lobby smelled of lavender and anxiety. "Happy to help," I replied, setting my laptop bag on the reception counter. "Where would you like to work?" Jessica led me to her office, a space that perfectly encapsulated her approach to business. The desk was a custom piece that must have cost thousands, but the computer on it was running outdated software. Framed magazine features about pet trends hung on walls painted in an expensive specialty finish, but the financial statements were stuffed haphazardly in decorative boxes rather than proper filing cabinets. "Everything's here," she said, gesturing to a chaotic pile of papers, receipts, and folders. "I've been meaning to organize it, but with everything else." I nodded, pulling up a chair. "Let's start with the basics: revenue streams, fixed expenses, and accounts payable." For the next 3 hours, I methodically sorted through the financial disaster before me. Jessica hovered anxiously, alternating. Between defensive explanations, the designer said that custom millwork was an investment in the brand experience. And bewildered questions. Wait, utilities are that much every month? By 11 p.m., I had created a spreadsheet that painted a grim but unsurprising picture. Jessica had spent nearly 70% of the loan already. Revenue was barely covering half of the monthly operating expenses. Vendor payments were being juggled in an unsustainable shell game. Without immediate intervention, the business would be completely insolvent within 6 weeks. "It's worse than I thought," Jessica whispered, staring at the screen. In the harsh light of the computer monitor, she looked suddenly older, the carefree confidence replaced by genuine fear. "What do I do?" I closed my laptop. "You have 2 options. 1, you can continue as you have been and watch this collapse. The bank will come after the loan, which means they'll come after you, Mom, Dad, and me as co-signers. Or 2, we can implement an immediate restructuring plan." "Restructuring?" She frowned. "Like bankruptcy?" "Not yet," I said, "but we would need to make significant changes immediately. Cut unnecessary expenses, renegotiate vendor contracts, adjust your service pricing structure, and most importantly, change how financial decisions are made going forward." She fidgeted with a crystal paperweight on her desk. "What kind of changes?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the opening to introduce the contract modifications without raising suspicion. "As a co-signer on the loan, I have liability for this debt," I explained calmly. "So does everyone who signed that contract. The way things stand, we could all face serious financial consequences. That's why I think we need to implement a new approval process for any business expenses over a certain threshold." Jessica's eyes narrowed slightly. "You want control of my business?" "Not control," I corrected. "Oversight. There's a difference. The loan agreement actually provides for this very situation." I pulled out my copy of the contract and flipped to the second modification I'd made. This clause states that all financial decisions require approval from all parties carrying liability. It's standard protection for co-signers. Jessica took the document, scanning the page with a frown. "I don't remember this part." "It was in the contract we all signed," I said simply. Truth wrapped in misdirection, the most effective kind of leverage. "The point is, we need to act quickly. I've prepared an initial restructuring plan based on tonight's findings." I handed her a folder containing the recommendations I'd prepared weeks ago, knowing this moment would come. Jessica flipped through it, her expression shifting from resistance to resignation as the reality of her situation sank in. "This says I need to let go of 3 staff members," she said quietly. "The ones you hired at premium rates for services that aren't generating enough revenue? Yes. And cut the champagne service, which costs you $200 a week, but hasn't converted to additional bookings, according to your own data." She continued reading, each page causing her shoulders to slump further. "You want weekly financial review meetings. To ensure we stay on track and avoid further crises, yes." After a long silence, Jessica set down the folder and looked at me directly. For the first time in our adult lives, she seemed to actually see me, not as her reliable safety net or as competition, but as someone with capability and insight she lacked. "I didn't think it was this bad," she admitted, a rare moment of vulnerability. "I thought I could make it work through sheer will." I nodded, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. Will doesn't pay vendors or satisfy loan terms. Action does. The question is whether you're willing to take the necessary actions or if you'd prefer to let this fail and deal with the consequences. Jessica glanced around her tastefully appointed office, at the custom desk that had cost more than my first car, at the framed feature from the local magazine calling her Connecticut's pet spa visionary, at the vision board displaying the 3 additional locations she'd planned to open by year 2. "If I agree to your plan," she said slowly, "what happens next?" "I'll help implement these changes immediately. We'll meet with vendors tomorrow to renegotiate payment terms. We'll revise the service menu and pricing by the end of the week. I'll set up proper accounting systems and train you to use them." I paused. "But I need complete transparency and compliance moving forward. No hidden expenses, no impulse purchases, no decisions about this business without proper financial analysis. And if I say no," her voice was barely audible, "then I'll inform Mom and Dad that, as co-signers, they should prepare for significant credit damage and potential legal action from the bank. I'll also inform them that you had an opportunity to salvage this situation but declined to take it." It wasn't a threat, just a statement of what would inevitably follow. Jessica knew it too. She stared at me for a long moment, perhaps seeing, for the first time, that the quiet sister she had always underestimated had grown into someone with far more strength than she had realized. "Okay," she finally said. "I'll do it your way." I didn't smile triumphantly or gloat. This wasn't about winning over Jessica. It was about securing my own future by ensuring this financial entanglement wouldn't destroy me. "Good. We'll start tomorrow. I'll be here at 7 a.m. As I gathered my things to leave, Jessica stopped me with a hand on my arm. "Emma, when did you become so different?" I considered the question carefully. "I haven't become different, Jessica. I've always been this person. You and our parents just never bothered to notice." The next morning arrived with a flurry of text messages from Jessica, alternating between panic over facing her staff with the cuts and renewed optimism about our new business partnership. I ignored most of them as I prepared for the day ahead, stopping only to forward the restructuring plan to my parents with a brief note. "FYI, Jessica's business is in financial trouble. I've attached the restructuring plan I'm implementing as a condition of my continued involvement as a co-signer. Please review the highlighted sections regarding your potential liability." It took exactly 12 minutes for my phone to ring. "What is the meaning of this?" My father's voice boomed through the speaker. "Some kind of takeover of your sister's business?" "Good morning, Dad," I replied calmly. "It's not a takeover. It's financial disaster prevention. Did you review the current state of the accounts?" "That's not the point. Jessica has worked incredibly hard on this venture, and now you're swooping in to prevent all of us from losing hundreds of thousands of dollars," I finished for him. "The business is burning through cash at an unsustainable rate. Without immediate intervention, it will fail within 6 weeks. As co-signers on the loan, all of us will be legally responsible for repayment." The silence on the other end told me he was at least considering this reality. "The contract we all signed includes provisions for exactly this situation," I continued. "Section 14, paragraph B specifically states that all parties financially liable must approve ongoing business decisions if the enterprise demonstrates poor fiscal management. I'm simply exercising that right." "I don't recall any such language," he said, his tone suspicious. "It was in the contract Mr. Bennett had us sign," I replied simply. "I'd be happy to highlight it for you if you'd like to review your copy." Another long pause. "That won't be necessary. What exactly are you proposing?" I walked him through the key points of the restructuring plan, emphasizing the protection it offered not just to me, but to him and my mother as well. By the end of our conversation, his tone had shifted from outrage to reluctant acceptance. "Your mother and I will want to be kept informed," he said stiffly. "Of course. I'll send weekly updates and consult you on major decisions." After ending the call, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 2 was now complete. My parents had acknowledged my authority in this situation, however reluctantly. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. When I arrived at Posh Palace at 7 a.m. sharp, Jessica was already there, looking both exhausted and resigned. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of difficult conversations, system implementations, and financial triage. I conducted layoffs that Jessica couldn't bring herself to do. I negotiated with vendors she'd been avoiding. I revised pricing structures that had been based on Jessica's perception of luxury rather than market reality. The staff that remained looked to me for direction rather than Jessica, a shift that didn't go unnoticed by my sister. The local pet owners who frequented the spa began to recognize me as a decision-maker. Even my parents, who at first attempted to undermine my authority during a particularly tense Sunday dinner, eventually deferred to my assessment when Jessica validated my financial projections. By the end of the month, Posh Palace was operating under a completely different model. Gone were the complimentary champagne and pet psychic readings. In their place were efficiently delivered core services at sustainable price points. The crystal chandeliers remained, but the staff below them now followed strict budgetary guidelines. The business was still not profitable, but it was no longer actively hemorrhaging money. With continued discipline, it might break even by month 4 of the restructuring plan, not the overnight success Jessica had envisioned, but not the catastrophic failure it had been headed for either. One evening, as we were closing up, Jessica sat across from me in what had effectively become our shared office space. "I've been thinking," she said, twirling a pen between her fingers. "Maybe you should take a more official role here, like COO or something." I looked up from the vendor contract I was reviewing. "I already have a job, Jessica." "I know, but you're practically running this place anyway." She hesitated. "And you're good at it. Better than me, obviously." The admission clearly cost her something. In our family's hierarchy, Jessica had always been the star, the one with vision and charisma. Acknowledging that my practical skills were more valuable than her creative impulses represented a seismic shift in her self-perception. "I'm not interested in running Posh Palace," I said carefully. "My involvement is about protecting my financial interests as a co-signer, not about building a career in pet grooming." "Then what do you want?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "From all of this, I mean." I set down my pen and looked directly at her. "I want 3 things. First, I want this business to become sustainable enough that the loan can be repaid without defaulting. Second, I want clear acknowledgement from you and our parents that my financial well-being matters just as much as yours. And third, once this situation is resolved, I want release from any future financial entanglements with this family." Jessica blinked, clearly taken aback by my directness. "You want to cut financial ties with us? Completely?" "Yes," I said simply. "I've spent my entire adult life serving as this family's safety net while my own needs and goals were considered secondary. That ends with this situation." For once, Jessica didn't immediately argue or attempt to manipulate the conversation. Instead, she seemed to be truly processing what I'd said. "I never thought of it that way," she finally admitted. That we took advantage of you." "I know you didn't. That's part of the problem." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of years of unbalanced family dynamics hanging between us. "For what it's worth," Jessica said quietly, "I'm sorry, and not just because I need your help now." It wasn't a transformative moment of complete understanding, but it was perhaps the first honest exchange we'd had as adults. I nodded, accepting the apology without effusive forgiveness. Some relationship patterns were too deeply entrenched to be resolved with a single conversation. As I drove home that night, I realized that something fundamental had changed, not just in how my family saw me, but in how I saw myself. The quiet accountant who had always been overlooked had become the authority figure they couldn't ignore. The dutiful daughter who never caused problems had become the woman who set terms and enforced boundaries. And it had all begun with a pen, a contract, and the certainty that no one would bother to read what I had written. 6 weeks into the restructuring plan, My phone rang at precisely 7:13 a.m. My mother's name flashed on the screen, unusual for a woman who rarely rose before 9 and certainly never called this early. "Emma, we need to talk." Her voice had that controlled vibration she used when trying to contain anger. "Your father and I have been patient with this intervention of yours, but things have gone far enough." I balanced the phone between my ear and shoulder as I continued preparing for work. "Good morning to you too, Mom. What specific issue are you calling about?" "Jessica called us in tears last night." The accusation was clear in her tone. "She says you've completely taken over, that you're making her feel incompetent in front of the staff, that you refused to approve the marketing event she wanted to hold." I poured my coffee into a travel mug. "The marketing event would have cost $15,000 we don't have for a potential return she couldn't quantify. And I haven't taken over. I've implemented the financial controls we all agreed were necessary." "This isn't what we agreed to," my mother insisted. "You were supposed to help her get back on track, not remake the entire business in your image and destroy her confidence." I paused, taking a measured sip of coffee before responding. "Mom, Jessica signed off on the restructuring plan. So did you and Dad. If you recall the meeting we all had 3 weeks ago, the business has stopped losing money and might actually break even next month. These aren't arbitrary decisions. They're necessary measures to protect all of us from financial disaster. Your father and I have been discussing this situation," she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "We've decided it would be best if you step back from day-to-day involvement. Jessica needs room to express her creative vision. That's what makes Posh Palace special." I almost laughed. Jessica's creative vision is what created a $300,000 debt with nothing to show for it except crystal chandeliers and monogrammed dog robes. The bank doesn't care about vision, they care about loan repayment. "We're prepared to provide additional funding to help with cash flow," my mother said stiffly. "Your father has spoken with Mr. Bennett about restructuring the loan terms. This was unexpected and concerning. Any loan modifications would require my signature as a co-signer," I reminded her. "We're aware," she replied. "Mr. Bennett will be contacting you with the paperwork. We expect you to cooperate, Emma. Family supports family." The familiar refrain hit differently now, less like a warm reminder of kinship and more like a chain they kept trying to tighten around my neck. "I'll review whatever Mr. Bennett sends," I said neutrally. "But I want to be very clear. I will not sign anything that increases my financial liability or removes the oversight provisions currently in place." "This attitude is exactly the problem," my mother snapped. "Where is this coming from, Emma? You've always understood your role in this family." That phrase, "your role," crystallized every unspoken expectation, every unfair dynamic I'd been fighting against. My role had always been to support, to acquiesce, to sacrifice so that Jessica could shine. "I understand my role perfectly," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm the responsible adult preventing a financial catastrophe that would affect all of us. If you and Dad want to throw more money into Jessica's failing business model, that's your choice. But you're not doing it with my name on the paperwork." I ended the call before she could respond, a boundary-setting move that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. As I drove to work, I mentally prepared for the next phase of this conflict. My parents wouldn't back down easily. Neither would I. By mid-afternoon, an email from Mr. Bennett arrived with the expected loan modification documents attached. My parents were proposing to inject an additional $100,000 into the business with relaxed repayment terms. The oversight, provisions I had secretly added, and that they still didn't realize weren't in the original contract, would be removed, giving Jessica full control over financial decisions again. Most concerningly, the new terms increased the personal liability for all co-signers from 25% to 40% of the total loan amount. My parents had essentially agreed to put themselves and me at greater financial risk to give Jessica another chance. To fail spectacularly. I forwarded the documents to my personal attorney, a precaution I'd taken after the first signs of trouble with Posh Palace. Her response came within the hour. "This is an extremely unfavorable modification for you," she wrote. "I strongly advise against signing. Let's schedule a call to discuss your options." That evening, instead of going to Posh Palace as I had every Tuesday for the past 6 weeks, I met with my attorney at her downtown office. The options she presented were straightforward, but consequential. You can refuse to sign, which is within your rights, but this will likely escalate family tensions, she explained. Alternatively, you could counter with your own terms, perhaps agreeing to the additional funding but maintaining the oversight provisions and rejecting the increased liability percentage. I considered this as I looked out her office window, at the darkening sky. "Is there a third option?" She hesitated, then nodded. "There is. You could invoke the mutual release clause you added to the original contract. If you can demonstrate that continuing under the current arrangement represents an undue financial risk to you, you may be able to separate yourself from this agreement entirely." "And leave my parents holding the entire liability," I said quietly. "Yes. Though given that they're willingly taking on more risk with this new proposal, they might be financially comfortable with that outcome." I thought about it for a long moment. What would triggering that clause require? Documentation of mismanagement, proof that continuing under the current arrangement presents significant financial risk, and evidence that reasonable attempts at resolution have failed, she listed. "Based on what you've shown me, you have all three." I nodded slowly. "Prepare the necessary paperwork. I won't sign their modification, but I won't trigger the release clause immediately either. Let's see how they respond first." The answer came faster than I expected. At 9:37 that night, my phone lit up with a text from Jessica. "Parents told me about loan changes. You're refusing? After everything I've done to follow your stupid rules for weeks? Family meeting, our house, tomorrow, 7 p.m. Be there." I didn't reply. The next day passed in a fog of anticipation. I moved through client meetings and spreadsheet reviews on autopilot, mentally preparing for the confrontation ahead. At 6:55 p.m., I pulled into my parents' driveway in Westbrook, noting that Jessica's car was already there, a united front waiting for me. The three of them sat in the living room like a tribunal. My father in his leather armchair, my mother perched on the sofa's edge, Jessica standing by the fireplace. Their expressions ranged from disappointed to openly hostile. "You're forcing us to have this conversation," my father began without preamble. "We had a reasonable solution that would benefit everyone, and you're blocking it out of..." What? Spite? Some misguided need for control? I set my purse down and remained standing. "I'm declining to sign a document that would put me at greater financial risk while removing the very protections that have kept the business from collapsing. That's not spite. It's basic self-preservation." Jessica made a scoffing sound. "The business is doing fine now. We just need the additional funding to expand the services and reach the target demographic I originally planned for." "The business is barely breaking even," I corrected her. "And only because we've cut expenses to the bone and implemented strict financial controls, none of which would continue under your proposed changes." My mother shook her head. "Emma, this attitude is beneath you. Your sister has worked incredibly hard." "And so have I interrupted, surprising even myself. "I've spent 6 weeks rebuilding a business that was weeks away from complete failure. I've negotiated with angry vendors, laid off staff your daughter couldn't face disappointing, and created systems that might actually make this venture sustainable, all while maintaining my full-time job." "Which you've been eager to remind us of at every turn," Jessica said bitterly. "You act like you're the only one making sacrifices." "Because I am," I said simply. You're pursuing your dream. Mom and Dad are supporting your dream. I'm the only one being asked to take on significant financial risk for something I never wanted any part of. My father leaned forward. This family has always supported each other. When Jessica needed help with college, we were there. When you needed help with what, Dad? I asked quietly. When have any of you ever sacrificed anything for me? The question hung in the air, unanswerable because we all knew the truth. There had never been a time when my needs came first. My father cleared his throat. That's not the point. The point is that we need to move forward with this loan modification, and we need your signature to do it. I'm not signing, I said firmly. In fact, I've reviewed the original contract with my attorney, and I'm prepared to invoke the mutual release clause that would remove me from this agreement entirely. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's face drained of color. My father's expression hardened to granite. Jessica looked frantically between them, clearly not understanding the legal implications. What does that mean? She finally asked. It means, my father said tightly, that your sister is threatening to leave us holding the entire loan obligation while she walks away clean. That can't be legal, my mother protested. It's completely legal, I replied. The clause is in the contract we all signed. It provides an exit option for any cosigner if continuing presents undue financial risk. I have more than enough documentation to demonstrate that risk exists. Jessica's eyes widened. You planned this, from the beginning. For the first time since this confrontation began, I smiled slightly. Yes, I did. When you all pressured me into signing a contract you never bothered to read carefully, I made sure to protect myself. This is outrageous, my father sputtered. We'll contest it. Bennett will never allow. Mr. Bennett failed in his duty as our family attorney by not ensuring all parties understood the terms they were signing. I cut in. That's actually helpful to my case, not yours. My mother was shaking her head slowly. Why would you do this to your sister? To us? The genuine confusion in her voice almost made me laugh. After all these years, they still couldn't fathom that I might prioritize my own well-being over family expectations. I'm not doing anything to you, I said calmly. I'm protecting myself from the consequences of decisions I never supported. You have two options now. 1, we continue under the current arrangement with the oversight provisions in place. The business follows the restructuring plan. No additional funds are injected, and we work toward profitability together. Or 2, I invoke the release clause, remove myself from all financial obligation, and leave you to manage this situation however you choose. Jessica stepped forward, arms crossed. There's a third option. You sign the modification as written, and we don't cut you out of this family permanently. The threat hung in the air between us. In the past, it would have been devastating. The ultimate leverage they held over me. The fear of being excluded, of losing the only family I had kept me compliant for years. But as I stood in that living room, facing their unified disapproval, I realized something profound. The threat had lost its power. The family they were offering to exclude me from was one that had never truly valued me to begin with. That's not an option I'm concerned about, I said quietly. Now, which of the two real options would you prefer? My father stood abruptly. I think you should leave now, Emma. We need to discuss this as a family. I am family, I replied. But I'll give you space to consider your decision. You have until Friday to let me know which option you're choosing. As I picked up my purse and walked toward the door, Jessica called after me. When did you become so cold? So calculating? I paused, hand on the doorknob. I've always been calculating, Jessica. The difference is that now I'm calculating in my own favor instead of yours. The drive home was strangely peaceful. For the first time since this ordeal began, perhaps for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely in control of my own fate. Whatever my family decided, I had options. I had leverage. I had power they couldn't ignore or dismiss. The next morning, I received a text from my father. "We need to talk. Dinner tonight at Riverside Grill, 7 p.m., just you and me." This was unexpected. My father rarely arranged one-on-one meetings, especially in public venues. I texted back a simple, "I'll be there," and returned to my work, curious about this new development. Riverside Grill was the kind of upscale restaurant where business deals were closed over expensive steaks and single malt scotch. When I arrived, my father was already seated at a corner table, nursing what appeared to be his usual bourbon. "Thank you for coming," he said formally as I sat down. There was something different in his expression, a wariness I wasn't accustomed to seeing when he looked at me. "Of course," I replied, accepting the menu from the waiter. We ordered drinks and appetizers, maintaining superficial conversation about the weather and local news. Only after our entrees arrived did my father get to the point. "I've been reviewing the original loan documents," he said, cutting precisely into his steak, "particularly the clauses you mentioned yesterday." I nodded, waiting. "They weren't in the draft Bennett showed us initially," he continued. "They appeared in the final version we all signed." So he had finally noticed. "Yes," I acknowledged. He set down his knife and fork. "You changed the contract before signing it." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I did. "Why didn't Bennett catch this?" he asked, more to himself than to me. "Because he didn't expect it," I replied simply. "And because no one, including Bennett, thought I would do anything but comply." My father studied me across the table, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "I underestimated you." Coming from him, it was almost a compliment. "Yes," I agreed. "You all did." He took a long sip of his bourbon. "Your mother and Jessica want to fight this. They want to claim you altered the document fraudulently." "They would lose," I said calmly. "All parties signed the final version, fraudulent or not, and any legal battle would only drain more resources from an already struggling situation." My father nodded slowly. "That's what I told them." This surprised me. "You did?" "Contrary to what you might believe, Emma, I didn't become successful by making emotional business decisions." He set his glass down carefully. "I've reviewed your restructuring plan for Posh Palace. It's solid. Conservative, but solid. With proper implementation, the business might actually succeed." "That was always the goal," I said. "Was it?" His gaze was penetrating. "Or was the goal to teach us all a lesson?" I considered this. Perhaps both. Unexpectedly, he laughed, a short, genuine bark of amusement. "Fair enough." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, sliding it across the table to me. "My counterproposal." I opened it carefully. It was a modified version of my original restructuring plan, with some key differences. The oversight provisions remained in place, but my father would join me in that oversight role. Additional funding of $50,000, half what they'd originally proposed, would be injected, but only according to specific milestones outlined in the plan. Most significantly, my liability would be reduced to 15% of the total loan amount, with my parents assuming the remainder. "This is surprisingly reasonable," I admitted after reading it through. "I'm a businessman, Emma. I can recognize when I've been outmaneuvered." He picked up his fork again. "Your mother and Jessica may take longer to accept this new reality, but they'll come around." "And if they don't?" He shrugged slightly. "Then they'll learn the hard way, as I have, that you're not someone to be underestimated anymore." We finished our meal discussing the details of the revised plan, and for perhaps the first time in my adult life, my father treated me as an equal, a negotiating partner. worthy of respect rather than a child to be directed. When we parted in the parking lot, he extended his hand formally. "Well played, Emma," he said as we shook. "I wish I'd paid more attention to your capabilities years ago." It wasn't an apology, but from my father, it was as close as I was likely to get. "It's not too late to start," I replied. The revised agreement was signed by all parties the following week. Jessica was coldly formal during the process, clearly viewing my actions as a betrayal rather than self-protection. My mother was barely more cordial, though she had stopped actively challenging the new arrangement. But as I walked out of Bennett's office that day, contract finalized and my financial exposure significantly reduced, I felt no need for their approval or understanding. The quiet accountant they had always underestimated had not only protected herself, but had changed the family power dynamic permanently. And it had all started with those 5 minutes in the bathroom, a pen, and 3 small changes to a contract no one else bothered to read. 1 year has passed since that day in Bennett's office when we signed the revised agreement. The seasons have cycled through Westbrook, leaves falling, snow blanketing the Victorian rooftop of Posh Palace, spring flowers blooming around its sign, and now summer heat shimmering off its freshly painted exterior. I sit on the patio of Meadowbrook Cafe across from Posh Palace, watching the morning clientele arrive with their perfectly groomed pets. The business has stabilized remarkably over the past 12 months. Not the meteoric success Jessica had initially envisioned, but a sustainable operation with realistic growth and manageable debt. I no longer oversee daily operations. My role has evolved into monthly financial reviews and quarterly strategy meetings, a comfortable distance that allows me to protect my interests without sacrificing my own career advancement. My father has taken a more active role than I expected. His business acumen finally applied to Jessica's venture rather than merely funding it. Jessica herself has changed in ways I never anticipated. The initial frost between us lasted months. Stiff interactions limited strictly to business matters, passive-aggressive text messages, pointed comments at family gatherings. But beneath her resentment, something else was happening. She was learning. Actually learning how to run a business, how to make decisions based on data rather than impulse, how to distinguish between genuine opportunities and shiny distractions. Last month, she presented a thoroughly researched expansion plan for a mobile grooming service, complete with market analysis, detailed cost projections, and conservative revenue forecasts. My father and I approved it unanimously. The look of pride on her face when she realized she'd convinced us through competence rather than charm was something I'd never seen before. My phone vibrates on the table, pulling me from my thoughts. A text from my realtor. "Offer accepted. Congratulations on your new home." I smile, a wave of satisfaction washing over me. After years of living in my modest apartment, saving diligently while family obligations drained my resources, I've finally purchased a home of my own. A charming craftsman on Oak Street with a reading nook underneath a bay window and space. For the garden I've always wanted. The down payment came from my personal savings, bolstered by the promotion I received 3 months ago. The firm recognized my financial acumen and client relationship skills, elevating me to senior manager, with a substantial salary increase and bonus structure. For the first time in my life, I'm building wealth for myself, rather than safeguarding others from their financial missteps. I'm gathering my things to leave when I spot my mother entering Posh Palace, carrying what appears to be lunch containers. Sunday family dinners have resumed in recent months, stilted at first, gradually warming as new patterns of interaction replaced old ones. My mother no longer dismisses my accomplishments or redirects conversations to Jessica's latest exploits. She asks questions about my work, my home search, my plans. Sometimes I think she's genuinely trying to know me after all these years of looking past me. My father approaches my table, having parked his Mercedes behind my Volvo. This meeting was scheduled last week, one of our regular check-ins regarding Posh Palace financials. But his expression suggests something different today. "Emma," He greets me, taking the seat across from mine. He looks older than he did a year ago, the events taking a toll I hadn't fully appreciated until now. Hope I'm not late. Right on time, I reply, closing my laptop. I was just about to order? Coffee? He nods and I signal the waiter before turning back to him. I was going to bring the quarterly reports, but I left them at home. We can reschedule if you'd prefer. Actually, he says, I wanted to discuss something else today. The waiter brings his coffee, and I watch my father add a precise amount of cream, never sugar, the way he has for as long as I can remember. Some patterns never change, even when everything else does. I've been thinking about the past year, he begins, about how things have unfolded since you modified that contract. I maintain a neutral expression. We haven't directly discussed my contract alterations since that dinner at Riverside Grill when he acknowledged being outmaneuvered. At first I was angry, he continues. I felt manipulated, deceived. But as time passed, I've come to see it differently. He takes a sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. My father has never been one for emotional conversations, preferring balance sheets to feelings. You did what I taught you to do, he says finally. Protect your interests, create leverage, negotiate from a position of strength. I just never expected you to apply those lessons within the family. You never thought you'd be on the other side of the negotiating table, I observe. He nods. Exactly. And that's my failing, not yours. Coming from my father, this is as close to an apology as I'm likely to receive. I accept it with a slight nod. Jessica is doing well, I say, changing the subject slightly. Her expansion plan was thorough. She is, he agrees. Though I suspect some of that may be motivated by a desire to prove herself to you. This surprises me. To me? Not to you and Mom? He chuckles. She spent her entire life having our approval, Emma. Yours is the one she never managed to secure. The irony isn't lost on me. I spent decades seeking validation from parents who focused on Jessica, while Jessica apparently sought recognition from the sister who was always overlooked. She mentioned she's invited you to her housewarming next weekend, he says. Jessica recently purchased a townhouse, smaller and more practical than the luxury condo she'd once talked about, a tangible sign of her evolving priorities. I'll be there, I confirm. Our relationship has thawed considerably in recent months. We're not best friends, perhaps never will be, but we've found a tentative respect for each other's strengths. My father reaches into his jacket and pulls out an envelope, placing it on the table between us. There's something else I wanted to discuss today. I eye the envelope skeptically. What's this? Open it, he says. Inside is a document titled Final Release of Financial Obligation. It's notarized, signed by both my parents, and releases me completely from any remaining liability related to Jessica's business loan. I don't understand, I say, scanning the legal language. The business is stable now. There's no need for this. It's not about need, my father replies. It's about acknowledging that you never should have been put in that position to begin with. Your mother and I have restructured the loan entirely. It's now solely in our names and Jessica's. You're free of any obligation. I stare at the document, a strange mix of emotions washing over me. Relief, certainly. Vindication. But also something unexpected. A twinge of separation. This loan, however problematic, had been one of the last ties binding me to my family's financial ecosystem. There's no catch, my father adds, misreading my hesitation. No conditions. We should have respected your financial autonomy from the beginning. Consider this a belated correction. I fold the document carefully and place it in my bag. Thank you. There's one more thing, he continues. Bennett is retiring next month. Our family lawyer, who had failed to notice my contract modifications, is finally stepping down after 40 years of practice. I've been considering who might replace him, my father says, watching me carefully. Someone with financial acumen, attention to detail, and a thorough understanding of contract law. I raise an eyebrow, finally seeing where this conversation is heading. Are you offering me a job as the family attorney? He smiles slightly. More of a consulting role. Quarterly reviews of our various holdings, estate planning updates, tax strategy. Paid at market rates, of course. The offer is unexpected but not unwelcome. It represents something significant, a professional relationship rather than the unbalanced family dynamic that defined our past interactions. I'll consider it, I say. But I'd need complete independence. No pressure to approve plans I don't believe in. No expectation that I'll set aside my professional judgment for family harmony. I would expect nothing less, he replies. In fact, that's precisely why I'm asking you. We finish our coffee, discussing the parameters of what such an arrangement might look like. As we're preparing to leave, my phone buzzes with another message. My realtor again, this time with the closing date for my new home. Good news? My father asks, noting my expression. My offer on the Oak Street house was accepted, I tell him. Closing in 3 weeks. The Craftsman with the front porch? It's a beautiful property. Solid investment, too. That neighborhood has appreciated steadily for years. I'm momentarily surprised that he knows which house I was considering, until I remember mentioning it during a recent Sunday dinner. Perhaps he had been listening after all. You know, he says as we walk to our cars, your mother and I could help with the closing costs, or... I hold up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. I appreciate the offer, but I've got this handled. The down payment is ready, the financing is secured, and I've budgeted for all associated costs. He nods, accepting this boundary without argument. Another change from the past. Of course, but the offer stands if you change your mind. Thank you, I say, meaning it. There's a difference between family support freely offered and family control disguised as generosity. I'm learning to recognize one without fearing the other. As I drive away, I glance in my rearview mirror at Posh Palace. The business that was supposed to be Jessica's statement of independence, but became entangled with my own journey toward autonomy. It's strange how things unfold, how a moment of forced compliance became the catalyst for transformation, how 3 small contract modifications altered not just legal obligations, but entire relationship dynamics. 6 weeks later, I'm arranging books in the built-in shelves of my new living room when the doorbell rings. Jessica stands on my porch holding a potted plant and a bottle of wine. Housewarming, she explains, offering both items. The plant is supposed to bring prosperity, according to the lady at the garden center, and the wine is just because it's good. I invite her in, watching as she takes in the space. The hardwood floors I've had refinished, the kitchen I've updated with, modest but tasteful renovations, the sunlight streaming through windows I selected for their eastern exposure. It suits you, she says finally. Practical but beautiful. Thoughtful. We settle on the back patio with glasses of wine, an unexpected Saturday afternoon visit that would have been unimaginable a year ago. The mobile grooming launch is going, well, she tells me, pride evident in her voice. We're already booked 6 weeks out, and the overhead is exactly where we projected. That's excellent, I reply. The strategy is working. Jessica traces the rim of her glass thoughtfully. You know, I resented you for months after what happened with the loan. I felt like you'd tricked us, manipulated the situation to make me look incompetent. I say nothing, allowing her the space to continue. But I've been thinking about it lately, and I realized something. You didn't make me look incompetent. I was incompetent. At business anyway. I had vision but no execution. Ideas but no structure. She meets my gaze directly. You forced me to learn skills I would have kept avoiding, and the business is succeeding because of that. You did the work, I point out. I just created the conditions where that work became necessary. She laughs softly. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. We sit in companionable silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun warm on the patio stones. Mom mentioned Dad offered you a consulting role with the family finances, Jessica says eventually. He did. I'm still considering it. You should take it, she says, surprising me. God knows we could use someone who actually reads the contracts. We both laugh, the tension of the past year finally dissipating into something lighter. Not forgotten, but transformed into a shared understanding. We are not the same sisters we were before the loan agreement. Perhaps we're finally becoming the sisters we always could have been, if expectation and resentment hadn't stood in the way. As I walk Jessica to her car later, she pauses before getting in. You know what's funny? All this started because none of us thought you would ever stand up for yourself. She shakes her head. We completely underestimated you. That's the thing about being overlooked, I reply. It teaches you to see everything that others miss. I watch her drive away, then return to my own home, purchased with my own money, decorated according to my own taste. On my desk sits the framed copy of the release document my father gave me. A reminder of the moment obligation became choice. The quiet sister who was forced to sign a loan for her more favored sibling took that moment of coercion and transformed it into liberation. With a pen, a contract, and the patience to wait for mathematical certainty, I changed not just my financial future, but the fundamental dynamics of my family. They say the devil is in the details. So is freedom, if you know where to look. Up. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.